Her brothers took everything: the house, the business, the money in the bank. But they ignored the one thing their father kept secret for years: a patch of worthless land that held the key to their entire future. If you've ever felt like you were counted out, like the world had already decided your worth, then I need you to stick with me for this. Hit that subscribe button and become part of a community that understands that the real story often begins when everyone else thinks it's over. The day it all ended, or so I thought, was the Tuesday after my 18th birthday. It was raining. The kind of thin, miserable city rain that doesn't wash anything clean but just seems to move the grime around. I was sitting in a plastic chair that stuck to the back of my legs, in an office that smelled of old paper and stale coffee. Across the polished desk sat Mr. Henderson, a man I'd known my whole life as a kind of background character, a name my father would mention after a long day, a face I'd see at awkward holiday parties. Now, he was the executor of my father's will, the final authority on my collapsed world. He adjusted his glasses, the fluorescent lights overhead glinting off the lenses, and slid a thin stack of papers toward me. "Ilara," he began, his voice professionally gentle. "As you know, your father's estate is complex." Complex was a kind word. My father, a man who could build a house with his bare hands but couldn't seem to build a stable family, had died 6 months prior. A heart attack, sudden and brutal, on a job site. In the chaotic aftermath, my older brothers, Mark and David, had descended like vultures. They were 10 and 12 years older than me, men from my father's first marriage, with wives and mortgages and an appetite for what they considered theirs. I was the inconvenient afterthought, the daughter from the second wife who had died when I was 5. For the past 2 years, since a fight had driven me from the family home at 16, I'd been navigating the labyrinth of youth shelters and foster care, a ghost in my own family's story. I'd aged out of the system the week before, landing in a tiny, subsidized apartment with a window that looked onto a brick wall. This meeting was supposed to be the final severance, the last piece of paperwork that would officially make me an orphan with a landlord. Mr. Henderson cleared his throat. "Your brothers have, through their lawyers, made their claims on the primary assets. The construction business, the family home in Westmere, and the liquid assets in the accounts." He paused, letting the weight of the words settle. Everything. They had taken everything. I felt a familiar coldness seep into my chest, a hollowness I'd learned to live with. I just nodded, my eyes fixed on a water stain on the ceiling tile above his head. I had expected nothing, and it seemed I was getting exactly that. "However," he continued, leaning forward slightly, "your father made a specific, separate provision for you." For a dizzying second, hope flickered. A dangerous, stupid little flame. Maybe he'd set something aside, a savings account, something to help me get through college, something to prove he hadn't forgotten me entirely. Mr. Henderson slid a single deed across the desk. "He left you the property in Northwood." I stared at the name. Northwood. I'd heard it mentioned in whispers and arguments growing up. It was a joke between my brothers. Dad's folly. A 40-acre plot of useless land he'd bought decades ago, miles from anything. It was nothing but rock and scrub pine, a place he'd go sometimes to be alone. My brothers said he just liked to stare at the dirt. "It's undeveloped," Mr. Henderson said carefully. "The assessed value is negligible. Mostly it's a tax liability." The tiny flame of hope sputtered and died, leaving behind the bitter smell of smoke. Of course. They took the millions in assets, and I got a tax bill. It was so perfectly them. So perfectly my life. I didn't say anything. I just reached for the paper, my fingers tracing the legal description of a place I'd never seen. It felt like an insult from beyond the grave. Mr. Henderson watched me, his expression unreadable. He seemed to be waiting for a reaction I didn't have the energy to give. The numbness was a shield, heavy but effective. Then he reached under his desk and pulled out a small, sturdy wooden box, about the size of a shoebox, bound with a leather strap. It was simple, handmade. I recognized my father's work in the dovetailed corners. "He also left you this," he said, his voice softer now. His instructions were very clear. It was to be given to you, and only you, on your 18th birthday. It was not to be part of the general estate. He pushed it toward me. It was heavy, solid. I ran my hand over the smooth, worn wood. It smelled faintly of sawdust and cedar, the scent of my father's workshop, a scent I hadn't realized I'd forgotten until it hit me. A wave of grief, sharp and sudden, pierced through the numbness. It felt like a physical blow, stealing the air from my lungs. This was real. He was gone. And this box was the last thing he would ever give me. "What is it?" I whispered, my voice hoarse. "I don't know," Mr. Henderson admitted. "He just called it your inheritance. He said you'd know what to do with it." My phone buzzed in my pocket, a harsh, insistent vibration against my leg. I pulled it out. The screen read, "Mark." My stomach tightened into a knot. I ignored it, pushing the phone back into my pocket. "Thank you, Mr. Henderson," I said, my voice flat. I gathered the deed, my hand curling around the leather strap of the box. I just wanted to leave, to go back to my tiny room with the brick wall view and disappear. As I stood, my phone buzzed again. David. Of course, they always worked as a team. "You should probably take that," Mr. Henderson advised gently. "It's better to have the conversation now." He was right. Delaying it would only make it worse. I took a deep breath, stepped out into the hallway with its flickering fluorescent light, and answered. "Hello, David," I said. "Ilara," his voice was slick with false bonhomie. "Just calling to see how the meeting went. Everything all squared away?" I could hear Mark talking in the background. They were in the same room, probably on speakerphone, ready to close their trap. "I have the deed," I said, my voice betraying nothing. "Ah, good, good," David said. "Listen, sis, we know that land is just a burden. Taxes, upkeep, you know how it is. So Mark and I, we want to do right by you. We'll take it off your hands, give you $5,000 for it. Cash. Help you get on your feet. $5,000 for 40 acres of land." It was an insultingly low number, but to me, living on instant noodles and the dregs of my last foster care stipend, it sounded like a fortune. It was a month's rent, a security deposit, food, a bus pass. It was survival. It was also, I knew, a fraction of what it must be worth, even as useless as it was. They weren't doing it to be kind. They were doing it to be thorough, to own everything, to erase the last piece of me from our father's legacy. "Why do you want it?" I asked, the question coming out colder than I intended. There was a brief pause. I heard Mark mutter something. "Sentimental value," David said, his voice a little too smooth. "Dad loved that place. We want to keep it in the family." The lie was so blatant it was almost funny. They had hated that he spent time there. They'd called it his escape from his real responsibilities. "I'll think about it," I said. "Don't think too long, Ilara," Mark's voice cut in, sharp and impatient. "The offer's good for 24 hours. After that, the tax bill is your problem." The line went dead. I stood in the hallway, the phone still pressed to my ear, the dial tone a dull hum. They thought I was a child, a problem to be managed and discarded. They thought I was stupid and weak, someone who would gratefully take the scraps they offered. And the most painful part was, they were almost right. I was scared. I was alone. $5,000 felt like a lifeline. I walked back into Mr. Henderson's office to sign the final papers. He looked up at me, his eyes searching my face. "They made you an offer, I assume." I nodded, placing the heavy box on the chair beside me. "Yes." "You don't have to take it," he said quietly. "I know," I said, though I wasn't sure I did. I signed where he indicated, my signature looking small and uncertain on the page. As I was about to leave, he stopped me. "Elara," he said, his professional mask slipping for a moment. "Your father, he was a complicated man. But he loved you. Don't ever think he didn't." I wanted to believe him, but the evidence, the years of distance, the token inheritance, my brother's casual cruelty, all pointed to a different story. I picked up the box, its weight a strange comfort, and walked out into the rain, feeling more alone than ever. The deed in my pocket felt like a joke. The box in my arms felt like a question I was too afraid to answer. Back in my apartment, the silence was deafening. The box sat on my small, wobbly kitchen table, a silent accusation. I circled it for hours, making tea I didn't drink, staring out at the rain-streaked brick wall. My brother's offer echoed in my head. $5,000. It was a ticket out of my immediate desperation. I could pay my rent for a year. I could eat something other than pasta and ketchup. It was the sensible choice, the adult choice. But every time I looked at the box, my father's last message to me, I felt a stubborn, unfamiliar flicker of defiance. They hadn't seen the box. They didn't know it existed. This was between me and him. Mr. Henderson's words came back to me. He said you'd know what to do with it. A promise or a burden? I couldn't tell. Finally, as the gray afternoon light began to fade, I sat down at the table. My hands trembled slightly as I unbuckled the leather strap. It was worn soft with age. The lid lifted without a sound. The air filled again with that scent of cedar and sawdust, a ghost from my childhood. Inside, nestled on a bed of what looked like old, yellowed wood shavings, were three things. A thick, cream-colored envelope with my name, Elara, written on it in my father's blocky, utilitarian script. Beneath it, a collection of what looked like rolled-up maps or blueprints, tied with twine. And a heavy, old-fashioned iron key, the kind you'd see in a fairy tale, its teeth intricate and complex. I reached for the letter first. The paper was thick, expensive. The envelope wasn't sealed. I slid the folded pages out. There were at least a dozen of them, covered front and back in that same familiar handwriting. I took a deep breath and began to read. "My dearest Elara," the letter began. "If you are reading this, then I am gone, and you are finally 18. I am sorry. I am sorry for so many things. I am sorry I wasn't there more. I am sorry for the fight that sent you away. I was a stubborn old fool, and my pride cost me the two most important years of your life. I hope one day you can forgive me for that." My eyes blurred with tears. I had to stop and wipe them away with the back of my hand, angry at myself for the sudden surge of emotion. It was too late for apologies. "I know what your brothers are like," the letter continued. "I'm not blind. I know they see the world in terms of dollars and cents, assets and liabilities. They are my sons, and I love them, but their mother raised them to value the wrong things. By the time I realized it, the damage was done. I knew if I left you money or a share in the business, they would find a way to take it from you. They would bully you, or cheat you, or manipulate you until you had nothing. I couldn't let that happen. A cold knot of understanding began to form in my stomach. This wasn't neglect. This was a plan. So I gave them what they wanted, he wrote. The house they coveted, the business they thought they were entitled to. Tangible things, things they could count and measure. Let them have it. It will keep them busy. What I left for you is something else entirely. Something they would never understand, and because they don't understand it, they will undervalue it. They will think it's worthless. I am counting on that. He was writing about the land. Dad's folly. That 40 acres in Northwood, Elara, is not just dirt and trees. It is the most valuable thing I ever owned. It is your fortress. It is your future. I stopped reading, my heart pounding in my chest. I looked from the letter to the deed on the table. A fortress? It was a tax liability. What was he talking about? I forced myself to keep reading, my skepticism warring with a desperate rising hope. 40 years ago, when I was just a young man starting out, I worked on a surveying crew up in that valley. The state was mapping it for the first time. It was wild country back then. Beautiful. While we were there, we found something. A geological anomaly. A massive underground river. A pure, clean aquifer fed by the snowmelt from the mountains, trapped in a granite basin miles beneath the surface. It's one of the largest untapped freshwater sources on the continent. But the access points, the places where you could drill down without having to go through a mile of solid granite, were few and far between. They were scattered across dozens of small, privately owned parcels of land. The words on the page started to swim. An aquifer. I remembered that word from a science class. An underground lake. Over the next 30 years, he wrote, I bought them, all of them, one by one, quietly. I used different company names, different agents. It took almost everything I had. Every spare dollar from the business went into buying up those little pieces of rock and scrub. The deeds are in this box. And then, 10 years ago, I did the final piece of the puzzle. I hired the best water rights lawyer in the state and had all the separate deeds and their associated riparian rights legally consolidated and attached to a single parcel. The 40 acres I left you. My breath caught in my throat. I fumbled with the twine around the rolled-up papers. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely untie the knot. I spread them out on the table. They weren't blueprints. They were geological surveys, property plats, legal documents covered in stamps and signatures. I saw it then. A map of the whole valley, with dozens of small, scattered properties highlighted. And another document, a master deed, showing how all of them, all their rights, now pointed to one single plot. Lot 734. My plot. The land itself isn't the prize, Alara, the letter explained. It's the key. Legally, no one can touch that water without your permission. That one plot of land controls the entire aquifer. It's a gate, and you are the gatekeeper. The phone rang again, making me jump. It was Mark. I stared at it, the screen glowing with his name. I understood now. Their offer wasn't about sentiment. It wasn't even about greedily consolidating the last family asset. It was business. They knew. Somehow, they knew. A development company called Aquacorp has been sniffing around that valley for years, my father's letter warned. They know the water is there, but they could never get the access. They've been buying up the surrounding land, trying to pressure the holdouts. I imagine by now they've approached your brothers. They'll offer them a fortune for the complete set. But they need your piece. Without it, all the other land is worthless to them. Don't sell it to them, Alara. Not for any price. I felt a dizzying wave of vertigo. The room seemed to tilt. This was too much. Millions of dollars. Water rights, secret deals. It felt like something out of a movie, not my grim, lonely life. I was just a kid who ate cereal for dinner. How could I possibly handle this? I know this is a heavy burden to place on you, he wrote, as if he could hear my thoughts. And you have every right to be angry with me for it. You could sell. Aquacorp will likely offer you more money than you can possibly imagine. Enough to live comfortably for the rest of your life. No one would blame you if you took it. But I want you to know why I did this. That valley, it's one of the last pristine places. The town of Northwood, the farmers downstream, their entire way of life depends on that water. If Aquacorp gets it, they will drain it dry and sell it in plastic bottles. And when it's gone, they'll move on, leaving a desert behind them. They will destroy that place. I couldn't bear the thought of it. I am giving you a choice, my daughter. A choice I never gave your brothers, because I knew which one they would make. You can sell and be rich. Or you can stay and be a guardian. You can protect that place. The iron key is for the cabin on the property. It's not much, but it's solid. There's a well with a hand pump for clean water, a wood stove for heat. In the floorboards under the bed, there's a lockbox. The combination is your mother's birthday. Inside is enough cash to last you a year or two while you figure things out. It's not a fortune, but it's a start. It's seed money for your new life if you choose to accept it. He ended the letter with one final plea. Don't let them bully you, Ilera. You are stronger than you think. You have your mother's heart, and that is a heart of iron and grace. Whatever you choose, know that I am proud of you and I love you. I sat there, in the quiet of my tiny apartment, the letter clutched in my hand, tears streaming down my face. I cried for the father I had lost, and for the father I felt I was just beginning to meet. I cried for the years of misunderstanding and loneliness. I cried for the terrifying, monumental choice he had laid at my feet. My phone buzzed again, an unknown number this time. I wiped my eyes and, on an impulse I didn't understand, I answered it. "Is this Ilara Vance?" a man's voice asked. It was smooth, professional, and held a clear note of authority. "Who's asking?" I said, my voice rough with emotion. "My name is Jonathan Pike. I'm a senior acquisitions manager with the Aquacorp Development Group," he said. "I believe your brothers may have mentioned me. I'm calling about a small parcel of land you recently inherited in Northwood. We're prepared to make you a very generous offer to expedite the sale." I looked at the letter in my hand, at my father's familiar handwriting. I looked at the iron key on my table, and for the first time in a very long time, I didn't feel weak or scared. I felt a flicker of something else, something like fire. "I'm not interested," I said, and I hung up the phone. The next 24 hours were a blur of motion. I packed my life into a single duffel bag and a backpack. It wasn't much. A few changes of clothes, a handful of books, my mother's photograph, and the heavy wooden box. I called the bus station and bought a one-way ticket to a town I'd never heard of called Silver Creek, the closest stop to Northwood. I left a message for my landlord, telling him I was leaving and he could keep the security deposit. It didn't matter anymore. Then I wrote a text message to my brothers. It was short. "Offer declined. Don't contact me again." I hit send before I could lose my nerve. Then I blocked their numbers. It felt like severing the last rotten cord that tied me to my old life. The bus ride was long, nearly 14 hours. I watched the sprawling gray city give way to suburbs, then to farmland, then to rolling hills that gradually grew into jagged, pine-covered mountains. The other passengers slept or stared at their phones, but I was wide awake, pressed against the cold glass of the window, watching the world change. I felt like a fugitive and a pilgrim all at once. I was running away from everything I'd ever known, and running toward a place, a purpose, that had been waiting for me my whole life without my knowledge. My father's letter was in my backpack. I must have read it a dozen times, his words becoming a kind of prayer, a map for the uncertain territory ahead. Each mile the bus traveled, I felt the grip of my old life loosening, the fear and numbness being replaced by a fragile, terrifying hope. What if he was right? What if I really could do this? Have you ever had a moment like that? A moment where you had to make a choice to leave everything behind and leap into the unknown, armed with nothing but a little bit of faith and a promise. If you have, I want you to tell me about it in the comments below. These stories, these leaps of faith, are what connect us. They remind us that we're not alone on these frightening, beautiful journeys. And if this story is speaking to you, please consider liking and subscribing. We're building a community here for people who understand what it means to fight for something that matters. The bus finally hissed to a stop in Silver Creek. It wasn't so much a town as a wide spot in the road with a gas station, a diner, and a small general store. The air was different here. It was clean and sharp, smelling of pine needles and cold rock. It was the kind of cold that felt clean, not damp and miserable like the city. I was the only person who got off. The bus pulled away, its red taillights disappearing around a curve, leaving me in an almost profound silence. For a moment, a wave of panic washed over me. I was completely, utterly alone. No one in the world knew where I was. But then I looked up at the sky. I had never seen so many stars. The city glow had always hidden them. Here they were a brilliant, glittering canopy, and the sight of them calmed my racing heart. I was small, yes, but I was part of something vast and beautiful. Inside the diner, which also served as the bus station, a man with a weathered face and a stained baseball cap sat at the counter. He looked up from his newspaper as I walked in, the bell over the door jingling. "You must be the one for Northwood," he said. It wasn't a question. News, it seemed, traveled fast in a place this small. "I need a ride to the old Vance property," I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt. He grunted. "That's a good 20 miles up the old logging road. Gonna cost you." His name was George, and he drove the town's only taxi, a battered but clean pickup truck. As we rattled our way out of town, leaving the few streetlights behind, he started talking. "Haven't seen anyone head out to that property in years. Not since old man Vance himself used to come up. Quiet fella, kept to himself. Said he liked the peace." He glanced at me in the dim light of the dashboard. "You his girl?" "Yes," I said. "His daughter." "Didn't know he had one," George said, not unkindly. "Folks around here figured those two slick sons of his were the only ones. They've been up here, you know, with some fancy corporate types in suits, poking around, asking questions about water tables. We all figured they were getting ready to sell the place." My hands tightened on the strap of my duffel bag. So it was already in motion. My father had been right about everything. "They're not selling," I said, my voice firmer than I expected. George shot me a curious look. "That's so. Good. We don't need any big city water bottling plant ruining this valley. That aquifer they're all sniffing after feeds every well and creek for 100 miles. It's the lifeblood of this place." He fell silent after that, and we drove the rest of the way with just the sound of the truck's engine and the crunch of gravel under the tires. The road grew narrower and rougher, the trees pressing in on either side. Finally, he pulled over next to a rusted gate hanging crookedly on a single hinge. A faded, barely legible sign nailed to a tree read, "Vance." "This is it," he said. "End of the line for me. The road gets too rough past here." I paid him, and he helped me get my bags out of the truck bed. Before he drove off, he paused. "Listen, kid. It gets real dark and real quiet out here. You got a way to call for help if you need it?" "I'll be okay," I told him. He looked doubtful, but just shrugged. "All right. The general store in town is run by Martha. Tell her George sent you. She'll help you out if you need supplies." And with that, he was gone, his taillights vanishing into the trees, leaving me once again in a silence so deep it seemed to have a physical weight. I pushed open the gate and walked up the overgrown track. The moon was bright enough to see by, casting long, skeletal shadows from the pines. After about a quarter of a mile, I saw it. The cabin. It was small and dark, silhouetted against the star-dusted sky. A sagging porch, a stone chimney. Beyond it, the hulking shape of a collapsed barn. It looked derelict, forbidding. My brother's valuation of worthless suddenly seemed generous. A part of me, the scared city kid part, wanted to turn around, walk the 20 miles back to town, and get on the first bus heading anywhere else. But then I thought of my father's letter. "It is your fortress." I squared my shoulders, walked up the creaking steps, and pulled the heavy iron key from my pocket. It slid into the lock with a satisfying clunk. The lock was stiff from disuse, but with a hard turn, it gave way. The door swung inward with a low groan, opening into a wall of blackness that smelled of cold dust, old wood, and mice. I took a deep breath, stepped across the threshold, and closed the door on the rest of the world. Finding the oil lamps was the first challenge. My phone's flashlight cast a weak, dancing beam around the single room. It was Spartan, but clean. A simple wooden table and 2 chairs. A pot-bellied wood stove in the corner, a narrow bed built into the wall, covered with a thick, dusty canvas tarp, a counter with a hand pump for water. It was a survivor's cabin, not a home. I found a lamp on the table, and after a few fumbling attempts, I managed to light the wick. A warm, golden glow pushed back the shadows, revealing the details of the room. The craftsmanship was unmistakable. My father had built this place. The joints of the furniture were perfect. The walls were solid log. It was simple, but it was strong. I pulled the tarp off the bed. The mattress was thin, but underneath it, I could see the outlines of the floorboards he'd mentioned. They looked different from the others, the seams tighter. I used the end of the iron key to pry up the edge of one. It lifted easily. And there, nestled in the dark space below, was a small metal lockbox. My hands were shaking again as I knelt on the floor. The combination. My mother's birthday. I hadn't thought of that date in years. It felt strange to dial the numbers in the quiet of the cabin. 08 11 74. The lock clicked open. I lifted the lid. It was full of cash. Neat stacks of $100 bills bound with rubber bands. I didn't count it, but it was more money than I had ever seen in my life. It was the seed money he'd promised. It was a year, maybe 2. It was breathing room. It was proof. Proof that he had planned all of this, that he had trusted me. Underneath the cash was a small, leather-bound journal and a satellite phone, still in its original packaging. A note on top of it read, "For emergencies. It gets a signal where nothing else will. Be smart." I sank back on my heels, the cold from the floor seeping through my jeans. The reality of it all was crashing down on me. The money, the cabin, the land, the water. The fight that was coming. It was real. This wasn't a dream. For the rest of that night, I didn't sleep. I built a fire in the wood stove, the crackle and pop of the burning logs a comforting sound in the immense silence. I pumped water from the well. It came out icy cold and tasted cleaner than any water I'd ever had. I sat at the table and read my father's journal. It wasn't a diary of his feelings, but a meticulous record of his work. Decades of notes. Water table measurements. Rainfall data. Notes on the local geology. And detailed entries about every land purchase, every negotiation, every legal filing. It was the story of a secret, 30-year obsession. He wasn't just a construction worker, he was a strategist. A patient, methodical guardian who had spent his life building this invisible fortress around the valley's heart. He wrote about the community, the families who had been there for generations, who didn't know the treasure they were living on top of. He wrote about his fear of what would happen if a corporation ever got control of it. As dawn broke, casting pale gray light through the cabin's single dusty window, I felt a profound shift inside me. The fear was still there, a cold knot in my stomach, but it was no longer in charge. Alongside it, something new was growing. A sense of purpose, a fierce, protective anger. My brothers in Aquacorp saw this land as a resource to be exploited, a commodity to be sold. My father had seen it as a treasure to be protected. He hadn't left me a tax liability. He had left me a legacy, a responsibility. He had left me his life's most important work and trusted me to finish it. I looked around the small, solid cabin. It didn't feel like a derelict shack anymore. It felt like a command post. It felt like the first real home I'd had in a very long time. The first week was a lesson in survival. I learned how to split wood without losing a finger, how to bank the fire in the stove so it would last through the night, how to cook beans and rice into something resembling a meal. I explored every inch of the 40 acres. It wasn't beautiful in a conventional way. It was rugged, rocky land, thick with scrub pine and thorny bushes. But as I walked, I started to see what my father must have seen. I found a small, clear stream that cut through a corner of the property. its banks thick with ferns. I found a high ridge that offered a breathtaking view of the entire valley, a patchwork of farms and forests stretching out to the distant mountains. From up there, I felt like I could see the whole world. I saw the fragility and the strength of it. I took the satellite phone and called Mr. Henderson. It took some time to explain. At first, he was silent, and I worried he thought I was crazy. But as I described the letter, the deeds, the journal, his tone changed from skeptical to stunned, and then to something that sounded like admiration. "My God," he said, his voice faint over the crackle of the connection. "The old fox. He actually did it. He spent years telling me he was building something for you, something that couldn't be broken. I thought he was speaking metaphorically." "It's real," I told him, "and AquaCorp is already here. My brothers are working with them." "I'll start digging," he said, his voice now crisp and professional. "I'll look into AquaCorp's permits, their corporate structure. You, Ilara, you need to be careful. They will not be happy when they find out you're not selling. They will play dirty." He was right. 2 days later, a shiny black SUV, completely out of place on the rough logging road, pulled up to my gate. 2 men in expensive suits got out. They were not the friendly, local type. One was Jonathan Pike, the man who had called me. The other was older, with cold, calculating eyes. They didn't bother with pleasantries. "Ms. Vance," Pike began, his smile not reaching his eyes. "We seem to have gotten off on the wrong foot. I think perhaps you don't understand the scale of the opportunity before you." "I understand it perfectly," I said, standing on my porch, my arms crossed. I was terrified, but I tried to channel my father's stubbornness. "Then you must understand that your position is untenable," the older man said, his voice a low growl. "We have acquired options on every other significant parcel in this valley. Your little plot is the last piece. It is, frankly, holding up progress." "Progress for who?" I asked. He laughed, a short, ugly sound. "Let's not be naive. We're prepared to offer you $5 million. That's our final offer. Sign the papers, and you can walk away from this shack and never have to worry about money again." $5 million. The number hung in the air, shimmering with possibility. It was an absurd amount of money. It was a new life, a new identity. It was everything I had ever thought I wanted. For a split second, I saw it all. A nice apartment in a new city, a college education without debt, travel, safety, security. All I had to do was sign a piece of paper. All I had to do was betray my father's life's work. I looked past them, up toward the ridge where I'd stood just the day before. I thought of the clear, cold water from the well. I thought of George, the taxi driver, and Martha at the general store, and all the other people in the valley whose lives depended on that water. I thought of my father's handwriting. "You have your mother's heart, and that is a heart of iron and grace." I met the man's cold gaze. "The land is not for sale," I said. His face darkened. The pretense of negotiation vanished. "You are making a very big mistake, little girl," he snarled. "We will get that land. With you, or without you. We can tie you up in court for years. We'll challenge the deed, the water rights consolidation. We will bury you in legal fees until you are begging us to buy it for a fraction of what we're offering today." They got back in their SUV, spun it around in a spray of gravel, and sped off down the road, leaving a cloud of dust and the echo of their threats hanging in the quiet air. The legal battle began just as they'd promised. A flood of official-looking letters started arriving at Mr. Henderson's office. Lawsuits, injunctions, challenges to the chain of title. It was a war of attrition, designed to bleed me dry emotionally and financially. My brothers were front and center, their names on affidavits, claiming my father had been mentally incompetent when he consolidated the deeds, that he had always intended for the land to be part of the larger family estate. They painted me as a greedy, delusional child, manipulated by a senile old man. Reading their words felt like being stabbed. But with every lie they told, My resolve hardened. This was no longer just about protecting a valley. It was about defending my father's memory. The seed money, which had seemed like a fortune, began to dwindle at an alarming rate as legal and consulting fees piled up. Mr. Henderson was a godsend, fighting for me at every turn, but he couldn't work for free forever. The pressure was immense. There were nights I'd lie awake in the cabin, the wind howling outside, and I'd be consumed by doubt. Maybe I should have taken the money. What was I, an 18-year-old girl with nothing, doing fighting a multi-billion-dollar corporation? But then morning would come, and I'd pump the cold, clean water, and I'd look out at the stubborn, rocky land, and I would know I couldn't give up. Word of the fight started to spread through Northwood. At first, people were wary. I was an outsider, the daughter of the strange man who kept to himself. But then they saw the Aquacorp surveyors, the lawyers in their fancy cars. They heard the rumors of a massive bottling plant, and they started to understand what was at stake. One day, I drove to town in the beat-up old truck I'd found in the collapsed barn and managed to get running. I went to the general store for supplies. Martha, the owner, a woman with kind eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor, slid a heavy cardboard box across the counter to me. "This is for you," she said. It was full of groceries, canned goods, flour, fresh vegetables from someone's garden. "We're not rich folks out here, but we take care of our own," she said gruffly. "George told us what you're doing. You keep fighting." That was the turning point. I wasn't alone anymore. A few days later, George showed up at my gate with 3 other men. They spent the entire weekend reinforcing the cabin's foundation, patching the roof, and cutting and stacking enough firewood to last me through the winter. A farmer from down the valley dropped off a generator. The local librarian brought me stacks of books on water rights law and environmental protection. Slowly, tentatively, I had become part of the community. They were my allies. This was their fight, too. We started organizing. We held meetings in the town hall. I was terrified to speak in front of people, but I stood up and told them my father's story, showed them his maps and his journal. I explained the legal structure he had built, this fortress made of paper and ink. Together, we hired an environmental law firm on a pro bono basis. They were young, idealistic lawyers, excited by the challenge. The tide began to turn. We uncovered evidence that Aquacorp had been illegally pressuring landowners for years. We found proof they had falsified environmental impact studies. The local newspaper got hold of the story, then a regional one. My brother's claims of my father's incompetence were publicly dismantled by testimony from Mr. Henderson and a dozen of my father's old colleagues who attested to his sharp mind and unwavering integrity right up to his death. Mark and David became pariahs, their greed exposed for all to see. The fight dragged on for nearly a year. It was the hardest year of my life. It was exhausting, and there were many times I thought we would lose. But we never gave up. Finally, facing a mountain of bad press and a string of legal defeats, Aquacorp withdrew. They issued a terse statement about unforeseen regulatory hurdles and sold off all their land holdings in the valley to a state-run conservation trust. We had won. The day the news broke, the whole town celebrated. There was a bonfire in the field behind the town hall, with music and food and dancing. People I barely knew came up to hug me, to thank me. George clapped me on the shoulder, his eyes shining. "Your old man would be proud of you, kid," he said. Real proud. Standing there, surrounded by the warmth of the fire and the community, I felt a sense of belonging I had never known. I had inherited more than just land. I had inherited a purpose. I had found a family. It's been 5 years since that day. I still live in the cabin. It's my home now. I've fixed it up, added a small solar panel for electricity, and planted a garden. I went to college online, getting a degree in environmental management. I work with the Northwood Valley Trust, the community organization we formed to manage the land and protect the aquifer in perpetuity. My life is quiet, and it's not rich in the way my brothers would understand. I don't have a fancy car or a big house. But I have a home, I have a purpose, I have a community that stands by me. I have the stars at night and the taste of clean water. Sometimes I walk up to that high ridge and look out over the valley. I think about my father, the complicated, stubborn man who saw the world so differently. He knew that true wealth isn't something you can count or spend. It's the legacy you leave behind. It's the good you protect in the world. He gave my brothers what they wanted, but he gave me what I needed. He gave me a choice. He gave me a chance to become someone I never thought I could be. He gave me a home, built not of wood and stone, but of purpose and love. And that's the real inheritance. It's not about what's left to you, but what's left in you. My story started with loss and a piece of paper that said I owned something worthless. But it turned into a story about finding my own worth by fighting for something priceless. It's a reminder that sometimes the things that other people discard, the things they overlook, are the things that matter most. What about you? What in your life has someone else called worthless that you know holds immense value? It could be a relationship, a dream, a piece of your own history, or a quiet place that feels like home. Share your story in the comments. I read every single one, and I believe in the power of sharing these truths. This channel is a place for those stories, for the quiet fighters and the guardians of what truly matters. If that's you, I hope you'll subscribe and join our community. Thank you for listening.